Hey guys, anime fanfics here. This is chapters 9 to 15 of Obito's redemption story by Yaboy Assassin on Wattpad. Links to all stories are in the description below, and make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Chapter 9. Obito awoke to a dull, white ceiling and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Dazed, he looked at the ceiling blankly before sitting up slowly and wincing. He could feel the severed drain on his chakra as well as a soreness. He must have been in the bed for days. He looked at his wrist to see a 4 had been inserted, then looked to his right to see the heart monitor. He was in a hospital. He let out a small, shaky breath as he clenched his fists. Despite being in bed for days, his chakra had not come back. He hadn't get this drained even when he synced his eyes to Kagaya's dimensions. But that was the least of his worries. Danzo had a Byakugan and Black Zetsu was already making his move. He put a slightly shaking hand to his head. I really hope I'm overthinking this and Black Zetsu didn't come to the past with me. He's already making a move, which was something he hadn't done before. He could just be doing something different since I'm not with him. The thought had to wait as the door to his room opened and Fugaku stepped inside, surprised to see the Uchiha awoke. Though he didn't show it. Closing the door, Fugaku spoke, "It seems you are awake. I was under the assumption you'd be in a coma." "Fugaku," Obito said slowly, confused. "What are you doing here?" He knew he wasn't part of the Uchiha except by name and blood, so he had no idea why the older man was here. He also had nothing to give. "The Mangekyo," the man started, locking into his widened eyes to gauge his reaction. "I was told that you have it." "Fuck," the Uchiha said, trying to calm down his rapidly beating heart. He wished he'd unplugged the heart monitor because it was telling Fugaku that he knew something with how it started to increase. "How is it that you gained the forbidden eyes of the clan?" "Heat monitor going steady," Obito answered with a calming release of breath. I don't know." Fugaku gave him a look but only hummed. Obito watched carefully as the older Uchiha moved about the room, stopping just before him. "He knows I'm lying," Obito thought, holding back an anxious look with a mask of blankness. Plus the clan head sat down in the bedside chair, closing his eyes and running his aching temples slowly. "The elders have not been informed of this development per my instructions," he told the raven as he opened his eyes. "But, despite my wishes, they do know of your Sharingan. They want a meeting held with you later today. I'm sure even you know what for." Obito shuffled slightly in the warm sheets, his back lying against the raised half of the bed. "Tell them that I'm not interested. The same way the clan wasn't interested in me." Fugaku nodded and said, "Of course you know it will not be that easy. The clan elders are quite persistent on matters that have to do with the clan. Specifically, towards its prosperity." Obito said nothing, already saying his piece. His mind was more towards what he would do about the weakness in his body. He needed Hashirama's DNA. That much was apparent. He knew his chakra was gone for a different reason, but the fact still stood that his emotions weren't in control and it would kill him if he was not careful. But where would he get those cells? Madara. That was where. Fugaku sighed before standing to his feet. "I will try to keep the elders off your back, but they have their own ways to contact you beyond my control. But I have a favor to ask of you." Obito watched his face carefully, attempting to find what the older Uchiha was looking for. He couldn't find anything. The mask the older man wore was too much for him to decipher. "I'd like you to train my son, Itachi." XXX. "Heir, Minato. Don't you think you should give it a rest?" Inoichi asked worriedly, watching the fellow blonde read another book with bloodshot eyes and a tired face. Though somehow it still held determination. "You've been like this ever since he was brought to the hospital. Everyone is getting worried. I will find out what happened to my student." Minato's bright blue orbs grew dark and cold. "And they better hope I'm merciful." 1. Despite being a war veteran, Inoichi felt sweat drop from his brow. The killing intent leaking from Minato felt as if 1,000 jounin were aiming to kill him. His face twisted at the feeling. When the pressure lifted, Inoichi sighed. It was pointless. Minato would not change his mind when it was stuck upon something. He was truly stubborn. I'll go get you something to eat. He looked down to see Minato hadn't looked away from his book at all, merely turning to another page. You just keep doing what you're doing. XXX. Days before Obito awakens. Kushina gripped her stomach tightly as she sat in front of the unflinching gaze of the third Hokage's wife. She squirmed a bit under it, already feeling a small bit of nervousness creep into her body, but she suppressed it almost immediately. That wasn't her or how she acted. She needed to calm down. She relaxed her tense body and released a calming breath of relief for doing so. Biwako watched impatiently, letting the Jinchuriki calm herself so she would speak clearly. She never liked a jumbled mess of words. Though calmed, Kushina still hadn't spoken, so Biwako did. Child, why have you called me so late? I'm assuming it has something to do with your seal. Yeah, it does. She said with a sigh, now outwardly rubbing her stomach. I've been feeling weird. It's like I can feel the Kyuubi's strength even more, but I feel drained as well. Biwako listened on silently as the Jinchuriki began listing off what was happening. It all started when I heard Minato mention a word, maybe a name. Ever since then it's like he's awakened. And he's been restless ever since. Biwako hummed lowly before speaking. When was your last period? Do you believe you are pregnant? Kushina's eyes nearly bulged from her skull by the way they jerked at the reaction. I really don't think it's anything like that. She shrieked, waving her hands in a panic. Could I have a rundown of the day all of this started? I'd be useful to know the cause. Biwako asked. Well, it all started with. She began going intently through her day as the Biwako listened. Perhaps this was a more pressing matter than first anticipated. XXX. You're sneaking food into the hospital again? Kakashi asked his teammate as she looked around the corner of a hallway to see if it was empty. Rin chuckled nervously as she stepped into the empty hallway and Kakashi followed nonchalantly. Well, you know how he is when it comes to hospital food. He'd rather starve than eat it. But you don't even know if he's awake or not. He reasoned. He's been out cold for days. I know, but even so, he might be awake. Sensei told us that it wasn't too serious and that he'll be woke in no time. She held the wrapped meal out to him. Plus this time I brought his favorite meal. Kakashi just hummed after that. He supposed it was like Rin to ignore what she thought if Sensei said things were fine, but Kakashi was always able to see underneath such things. He saw the hesitation and unnerving doubt in the Namake's face. He knew that the man was lying. He just hadn't confronted the blonde yet. He looked at his teammate. But Rin believed him, or, at the very least, pretended to. It wasn't hard to believe by any stretch. They stopped in front of a door with a number in it that they'd gotten from the front counter. Rin knocked 3 times to politely let someone know they were coming in before they did just that. The sight that befell them surprised them both. It was Obito in a gown doing one-arm push-ups as he groaned lowly in struggle, counting at 173. He was midway through a push-up before he stopped and looked up to see his 2 teammates. 3. Oh, hey you guys. Obito greeted, lowering himself to the ground. How's it going? Oh, Obito. Rin cried out, almost dropping the food she meant to give him as she crashed into with a hug. Obito could tell she had been worrying herself and gave her a couple of pats on the back. It's okay, Rin. I'm okay. Tell me what that was with your Sharingan. His gaze went from Rin then up to Kakashi, who stood with crossed arms. And I won't take it's nothing as an answer. I know what I saw. After a couple of moments of silence, Rin spoke after breaking away from Obito. Don't question him, Kakashi. He's probably still tired. Kakashi didn't so much as blink. I'm sure he is doing more than 100 push-ups with a single arm. Obito, answer my question. He demanded. Obito only sighed, finally coming up with an excuse. It's a clan secret. I can't tell you. Kakashi narrowed his eyes. Wrong answer. Try again. Kakashi. Rin practically whined. Stop. Kakashi finally turned to her. Don't you think it's strange? Out of nowhere he has a Sharingan, then it turns into a special shape and he's admitted into the hospital. Sensei won't answer any of our questions with straightforward answers, and the Uchiha clan has gone silent and secretive about the subject. I want to know what's going on. I'm done being left out of the loop. I'm a Jounin as well. You're right. Obito surprisingly agreed, shocking his two teammates as they turned to him swiftly, the shock showing on their faces. He was tired of running around them, and he knew it was time to tell the truth. Them knowing about the secrets of the Sharingan wouldn't hurt. Plus, he didn't really care about the clan one bit. With a small sigh, the Uchiha explained the workings of his eyes. XXX. Hours had passed and Minato hadn't found anything more on anyone with Kagaya in their name. It didn't help that it wasn't common and that his only lead happened to be a nomadic clan that rarely if ever traveled into the land of fire. And even if they did, they weren't secret about it because of their bloodlust for battle. But right now, that wasn't his problem. It was a group of Uchiha elders. Angry ones at that. I won't have you guys try and bring Obito back into your clan when you five were the ones to abandon him. Minato said. These elders had insisted he rat his student's location out to them just because he had this new Mangekyo Sharingan. He had forced Fugaku to tell him when the boy had been first admitted. He had threatened to go to the Hokage if he couldn't get answers, and Fugaku relented reluctantly. He didn't like to threaten friends, but this was necessary. Now these elders were aiming for his student. We may have done so, but the boy has the Uchiha blood running deep in his veins. The senior of the group said. He needs to learn to hone it, and that could only be done if he rejoins our clan. You have to understand where we are coming from, Minato-san. Another elder started in a much lighter tone. It was so obviously fake the blonde would have pulled a Kushina and rolled his eyes. Those eyes he has are special and need to be supervised. Only we can do that. I can do that as well. He argued. Obito is under my care until Team Minato is disbanded. You were the ones who did that. Another elder glared at him in disgust. You dare. Don't you see what you're doing? The boy had potential that will only be wasted if he does not get the proper training. Minato began getting a bit angry and unconsciously released killing intent as he stepped toward the elders. When he was a part of your clan, he didn't get any training from any of you. What progress he's made now should show you that he doesn't need you. He became a Chunin all without the Sharingan, and I never had a doubt he could become the Hokage without one either. His eyes narrowed and his killing intent fluctuated like tidal waves. I won't repeat myself anymore. Obito remains under my care. Saying his piece, the Hokage candidate stormed away and the elders released breaths they hadn't known to be holding. The oldest gritted his teeth in both anger and frustration. Obito will be ours, Minato. He'll come crawling back to where he belongs. An idea came to him and he smiled like a madman. And I know a way to make that happen. As Minato began to calm himself, his mind went into Brainiac mode. He didn't understand what this Mangekyo Sharingan was, as Fugaku only said the name and would not say anything else. It had to be something big. The entire clan higher-ups were aiming to get him into the clan, not just the elders. They were only the most vocal on it. He didn't want to, it wasn't in his nature, but he knew he would have to go around Fugaku to get the answers he seeks. It was the only sure way. He knew what he was told would be 100% the true and give him insight on what was happening to his student. He knew it had to be something bad. While he didn't know anything about this Mangekyo Sharingan, he knew a good amount about the Sharingan. He knew it could only awaken with strong emotion. Mix that with what he found in the Uchiha's flat and he had an idea of what happened. Or at least he thought he did. He sighed, rubbing thoroughly through his spiky blonde locks. He felt he was missing the most important part of a puzzle and he just couldn't get the full picture. Something was missing, but what? What didn't he know? He wished Jiraiya was in the village. His sensei always seemed to know what to say, and Minato regularly went to him for advice when he didn't know what to do. Maybe contacting him through the toads would help. Whatever he would decide, it needed to fast. The Canopy Bridge mission was fast approaching. Chapter 10. Obito was walking through one of many training grounds inside the Hidden Leaf Village. So many things had happened to him since he woke up, and he needed to think on it all. First was his conversation with his teammates. He'd been able to tell them lies on how the Sharingan could be activated and thanked the Uchiha for the secretive ways, as they couldn't confirm if he was telling them the truth or not. Though Kakashi still didn't look convinced, he still took it, for now. What he was really worried about was Kakashi asking him who Kaguya was and saying that he gotten the name from Minato. But where did Minato get that name? Obito was sure he hadn't said it. No, he was getting off topic. The blonde already knew, so it was no help to focus on it. He'd deal with that later, since it was the least of his problems anyway. Second was finding Hashirama's DNA. He couldn't have another time where he would be so vulnerable, like being in a coma. Especially now that he was known to have the Sharingan. And while Fugaku was the only one who knew of the Mangekyo, he didn't know how long that would last. He couldn't risk Danzo or Orochimaru taking his eyes away from him while he slept. He needed a way to find the snake though. Third was he needed to find a way to kill Danzo without causing a stir if he could. Despite the hatred he held for the Warhawk, he knew the man held a lot of political weight and knew very powerful people. Killing him out of nowhere could put suspicious on anyone, but especially the Uchiha, as the village didn't have the kindest words for them. Killing Orochimaru was something that shouldn't be too big of a deal for him, however. Last but not least was his decision to follow along with Fugaku and make Itachi his student. He figured it would benefit to have someone as strong and intelligent as Itachi in his side if he were to need someone else to help him with the pest that needed to be eliminated. And if he were to need to sacrifice himself, passing on his belief in ridding the world of evil to Itachi would be a good idea in his opinion. The thunk of metal hitting a target grabbed him out of his thoughts, and he looked ahead of a tree in the dense forest he was in to see a young Uchiha in a throwing position and 6 shuriken embedded in a target dummy. The dark curls in his head looked familiar, but Obito knew who this was when he saw the Tanto holster. This was Shisui Uchiha, the prodigy of the Uchiha and the most powerful of his class. Obito was surprised to see him. That was pretty good, right? The boy asked himself as he panted slightly and began walking to pick the shuriken out of the target, but he felt something weird. Like he was being watched. He turned to immediately to see Obito, who was surprised at the speed he could move looking so young. Though he hadn't shown it. Oh, hi. Didn't know I had an audience. You're pretty good, Shisui Uchiha, correct? Obito asked, walking into the clearing. Yep, that's me. You come here to spar or something? The boy asked. Obito was about to say no when he stopped himself. He could use a spar after spending days laying in a coma. Of course, having Shisui around could help him at least warm up. Not to mention see him potential with his own eyes. Obito fell into a stance quickly, already feeling the tension in his muscles. He'd go easy until he adjusted. Yeah, let's do this. Shisui smirked and fell into his own stance, looking to be mixture between the Academy Standard one and the Uchiha Specialized one. If I win, you have to buy me some dango. Before Obito could agree, the genin sped forward, surprising the older Uchiha with his speed, but it wasn't something he couldn't react to. He blocked a punch that aimed for his face and watched the genin spin around and get low to sweep his legs from under him. Obito jumped away, backflipping midair and landing on his feet. Shisui kept on it and threw kunai, all of which were sidestepped, and leaped at him to make up for the height difference, aiming a multitude of fast strikes at his face. Unfortunately, none hit home as Obito sidestepped and moved his head out of harm's way. He then used the momentum he already had to spin, cutting through the boy's offense with ease and pushing him away with a strong palm to the chest. Shisui recovered quickly midair and flipped to his feet before keeping on the attack. He quickly whipped out his tanto and aimed perfect strikes that were dodged again by Obito as he backed away. Getting tired of this quickly, Shisui rushed in but wasn't prepared for Obito to push him away with a kunai that he had thrown earlier. Shisui knew why he was backing up now but could not focus on it as Obito was now the one rushing. Blocking and rolling out of the way, Shisui could barely keep up with the older Uchiha's movements and found himself jumping away every 5 strikes Obito would send. He decided to back away a big distance, putting up his tanto before preforming seals. When he finished, he exhaled a large breath of air and curled his fingers around his mouth. Fire style, fireball jutsu. The fireball materialized and came rushing at the Obito. Obito hadn't regained not even half his chakra and he could still use a couple of fire techniques, but he decided to jump high into the air to avoid the flames. Taking a quick breath, Shisui leaped into the air to continue his attack on Obito, but the latter decided it was time to end the bout. He knew Shisui was definitely on Chunin level in every aspect but Jounin in intelligence. Obito launched the kunai he had taken at the boy and it got caught on the back of his collar before he launched away and into the same dummy he was practicing on. Obito landed on the ground in front on the boy with a small smile. That was exactly what he needed. Guess I'm the winner of this spar. Dang it! I thought I had you. Shisui said, removing himself from the dummy and landing on the ground safely. You did well. I suppose bringing you some dango wouldn't hurt. Plus the Uchiha needed something to take his mind of what he needed to do in the near future. Really? The Uchiha's eyes sparkled in amazement. Most of his money from mission went to pay house bills, so he thought he wouldn't get his treat. Then from this day forward you are both my Nichan and rival. I'll beat you one day. Obito raised an amused eyebrow. You don't even know my name though. Sheepishly, the boy raised a hand to the back of his head. His cheeks were red with embarrassment and a small chuckle came from his grinning lips. Heh, I guess so. Crazy, huh? I suppose. He said in amusement before he held out a hand. Obito Uchiha. Shisui shook it. Then you are who I strive to beat, Obito Nia. Triple X. They began their walk to the dango shop shortly after their handshake and it hadn't taken long to reach it. It wasn't too far from the training grounds and the area wasn't very packed like the market district was. It had been that fact that had them meeting up with Anko, who had a ton of soot on her. Yo, Obito. How's it going? She asked, but when she caught sight of the smaller Uchiha she grew a curious look. Who's the kid? Obito looked at her with some familiarity. They hadn't really been close at all way back when he was a kid, but they happened to catch each other at the dango shop now and again and had talked to each other about anything that really came to mind. They were more acquaintances than anything else, so Obito hadn't freaked out when he seen her. Someone I'm training. Obito said neutrally. What are you doing here? She shot him and grinned and used a thumb to point to the shop before them. Isn't it obvious? I'm here to chow down, of course. You like dango too, miss? Shisui asked, leaning forward from behind Obito. And polite too. Totally unlike you, Obito. She grinned more humorously when he gave her a blank stare for the comment. Anyway, let's get a move on. Obito said, turning around. He was about to begin walking when Anko said words that stopped him cold in his tracks. Hold on. I'm waiting for Orochimaru-sensei to catch up. He had things to do after training, you see. Obito turned around back to her, having a bewildered look on his face. 1. Orochimaru was coming here? Already? He hadn't expected to find the snake Sannin so early, especially when he was known for being very slippery and hard to find unless he wanted to be found. He should have expected it though. Orochimaru was still a part of the village, so seeing him around somewhere shouldn't have come out of his head. From his thoughts, he hadn't sensed a pale white figure approaching them until he spoke. Well. What do we have here, Anko dear? Obito's eyes slammed on the Sannin, and even with all his power he couldn't fully suppress the shiver that made its way down his back. The Sannin's aura was so unsettling and creepy that he felt the kid behind him shift. He could feel the boy clutch his leg and he felt the emotions he was feeling. fright, nervousness, and a whole lot of tension. It was expected though. Even if he was very impressive for his age, this was a Sannin. Nothing. Just happened to meet up with these two and we decided to wait till you would show up so we could go. She said with a shrug, and Obito wondered how she was so unaffected by the Sannin. It was so difficult to even be near the Sannin for him. A hum came from his mouth as he turned to them in interest. It sounded more of a hissing noise, however. I didn't think the two of you even knew each other. How interesting. How's your teammate, Kakashi-kun? Is he still breaking records set by the academy? Obito's eyes only narrowed as the Sannin opened his mouth to speak again. He's interesting, isn't he? I was even one of the ones who put my vote on letting him become a jounin. While he still holds my interest, I have some for you too, Obito-kun. When a smirk sat across his pale lips, Obito felt a bead of sweat drip from his brow. Somehow the Sannin had made him nervous. For his pride's sake he blamed on his child body and his low chakra. Anko blinked, wiping the inside of her ears with a pinky. Why haven't we gone in yet? The dango won't come to us, so let's get a move on already. She grabbed Orochimaru's hand and began leading the Sannin into the dango shop. Hey, come on guys. She yelled behind her as she saw the two Uchiha hadn't moved. Obito stared at the back of the Sannin in surprise. That snake knew. He knew about his sudden Sharingan activation as well as it had been to its final state rather than the first. Did that mean Danzo knew as well? The thought of two people like that knowing his secrets frightened him more than he would ever tell someone. I really don't like that man, Obito nii. The boy beside him muttered almost inaudibly, tone low from fear. That snake had his eyes on the boy as well and smirked at him. 2. It's okay, Shursui. You aren't the only one. The quick snack at the shop went by in relative silence. Orochimaru had all but stopped talking and it was only Anko who was trying to keep conversation going. Obito didn't like putting Shursui through doing anything with Orochimaru for extended periods, but he had already decided that he would need Senju cells if he were to combat both Madara and Black Zetsu. He knew Madara was old, but it would never hurt to be careful. And he knew Orochimaru was his only ticket way into getting it for sure. Getting it while he was fighting Madara was too risky. He also decided that he'd go himself instead of a shadow clone. It would be better in his weakened state anyway. When the snack ended, he sent Shursui home and began following the two using the shadows as cover. XXX. Hot green tea brewed to perfection had been sat on Fugaku's desk as night began to roll around. He thanked his attendant before picking up the cup and taking a small sip. It was good, very good. He needed it after all. Today was a hectic day for him as he had to deal with clan elders, police reports, Minato, and one very suspicious Uchiha. He only wished it could get any worse than it already had. Fugaku thought back to his demand he gave to Obito. It had almost been an ultimatum. Of course he hadn't just said it on the spot, it was an important part of his plan. If he could have the boy teach Itachi, then he could also keep an eye on the Uchiha for any unusual signs. The development of his Mangekyo Sharingan also was interesting, perhaps even more than the Uchiha himself. He understood that the Uchiha didn't want to rejoin the clan, he could understand the reasoning as well, but Fugaku was not blind to chance. The legendary eyes had to be kept in the clan, and while he was more understanding about it, unlike the Uchiha elders, he also understood why he needed to be in the clan. To be trained and for his protection. He could only see what the future would hold now. XXX. After Obito had told them the secrets of the Sharingan, he had practically escaped them by leaving the room as fast as possible. All it did was give Kakashi more questions than answers. Well, what do we do now? Rin answered unsurely, gaze sweeping the room in confused gait. She honestly didn't know what to make of what they had just been told. That this Mangekyo Sharingan was an effective dramatic emotion and caused the user to gain the ultimate power, but at a heavy cost. Their own eyesight, huh? The thought alone sent chills down Kakashi's spine. He was lucky to be able to shake it off, but Rin wasn't as lucky. The thought alone turned her skin pale. Kakashi's face set a grim line. "Rin, you know what we have to do, right?" She sent him a worried look. "I know what you're thinking and I really don't like it." But Kakashi's look of defiance held strong. She knew his mind hadn't changed. "We're going to the Uchiha district. I want to know everything about this Mangekyo Sharingan. Triple X." Minato closed the door to the inside of his house as he walked absent-mindedly, deep in thought. If he couldn't get the answers he was looking for, he'd have to find it himself. He felt Fugaku hadn't told him everything that happened to Obito. He couldn't help but not trust the Uchiha's words despite his own apprehension and the fact that they were longtime friends. Something that the Uchiha said didn't stick right with him. Minato?" The sound of his wife's voice broke him from his trance and he turned to the kitchen doorway to see her, a trash bag in hand. "Are you okay? You've been circling the living room for a while." An embarrassed look crossed his face. "Oh, really? Never noticed." He rubbed the back of his in embarrassment. "Well, if you say so." She meant to continue her task of taking out the trash when Minato grabbed her into a hug when she was close enough to him. "Minato, the trash stinks." Despite her protest, the redhead practically melted into the hug. He had put her close, making sure no space was left between them. "What's this for? Are you okay, Minato?" "I'm okay," he muttered lowly, voice softening as he let the stress he'd been under slip away from him. "Let me hug you for just a bit longer." "Okay," she muttered quietly, letting the garbage bag drop on the living room floor so that she could hug him back. She'd clean it up later. They had stayed like that for a couple of seconds before Minato had released her. He gave her a thankful grin. "Thanks for that. I really needed it, Kushina." "What are you being a sissy about now?" she asked, but glanced to the ground, seeing the garbage bag still on the floor, and went to pick it up. "Hold that thought. Let me finish this first." When she was gone, Minato went into the kitchen to grab something to drink. The little affection from his wife had calmed him down considerably. He was glad he had someone like her. "I'm back, Minato," she announced, and seconds later walked into the kitchen. "Now what was that all about?" Minato chuckled as he rubbed his head. "Can't I just hug my beautiful wife?" When he saw the look that spread across her face, he knew the answer. "Right. Well, I talked with Fugaku." "Yes, keep going," she egged on. "Obito has this power from the Uchiha clan. Something they call the Mangekyo Sharingan." She never heard of something like that at all. She hummed a finger to her chin. "I don't think I've heard Makoto mention anything about that ever." Minato nodded. That was understandable. "I know. She wouldn't mention a clan secret like that." She raised an eyebrow. "Then how did you get Fugaku to tell you?" "He's more stubborn than anyone I know. I threatened to go to Hokage-sama with my findings." Minato still wasn't proud of that. It had to be done, however. He was tired of being left out of the loop. "Wait, he doesn't know?" Minato shrugged. "He might, but I wasn't the one to tell him." "Okay. Well, what is this Mangekyo Sharingan, anyway? And how does Obito have it?" Fugaku told me that he didn't know the exact reason of why Obito had it, but knew that it was because of some dramatic emotion. Her eyebrow raised up. "And what emotion would that be?" "It could be anything. But I'm certain it was a bad one, and it has something to do with this Kagaya person." As soon as that name left his mouth, she froze. Her pulse increased and her pupils dilated. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Agonizing pain shot through her stomach and she groaned loudly, falling to her knees. She could hear mutely Minato calling out in worry and felt him around her, but she could only focus on the intense pain coursing through her. Then she felt it. The sealing tattoos on her stomach began to show, and her head also began to feel like it was being beat on. She felt the Nine-Tails chakra leaking from her before she lost consciousness. Kushina. Kushina. Chapter 11. Shock and panic was the only emotions that Minato could feel as he knelt over his wife, trying to sense if he could feel any of the Nine-Tails chakra. He was anxious as he carefully watched the seal on her abdomen for any type of change. Nothing changed and he decided to act, stepping away briefly and preforming a couple of seals. Summoning jutsu. He yelled, slamming his palm on the floor beside his wife. Chakra caused seals to spread beneath him and, in an instant, a puff of smoke erupted the room and clouded his vision. When it cleared, 2 frogs had emerged. He was about to say a greeting when one hit him over the head. And it hurt a lot. Minato clenched his aching head tightly as he grunted in pain. We were in the middle of dinner, Minato boy. The one with the gray cloak yelled, glaring in annoyance at the blonde. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, Master Fugaku. Minato said, running his head as the ache had calmed a bit. But please do me a favor. Can you reverse summon Jiraiya-sensei for me? Minato, what's going on with Kushina? Shima found herself asking without thinking, seeing the unconscious form of the redhead Jinchuriki and the seal holding the beast back in full view. I don't know. The speedster admitted in a small panic. She suddenly collapsed without warning and I can feel the Nine-Tails chakra slipping through the seal. I was wondering if you know anything about what's happening. I don't see a problem with the seal itself. Fugaku said after a brief but detailed inspection of the seal. It looked completely normal to him, and while he felt the Nine-Tails chakra slipping through the seal, it was minute at best and it would cause no harm by his observation. He told Minato as much, adding on the fact that he was being a bit hasty in calling them. If nothing was wrong with the seal, then the Nine-Tails would stay safety secure in the seal. At this, Minato sighed in relief and felt the tension leave his body, but the worry hadn't. He had asked Fugaku if he knew the cause of it but was disappointed when the sage could offer no insight. He could only tell him that it would be best to bring the Jinchuriki to the hospital for any other problems unrelated to the seal and notify Biwako in case she knew anything. Minato nodded at the advice, intent on following, and the 2 frogs left in a puff of smoke. The prodigy of the leaf had fixed Kushina's clothing before grabbing onto her and teleporting to the lobby of the Konoha General Hospital. XXX. Kakashi had first expected to just be able to walk into the Uchiha district because of his teammates' affiliation and even more so because of recent events. He decided he would bring his problems directly towards the Uchiha clan leader himself, but the task was made more difficult when he was denied at the entrance. For some reason, the Uchiha thought they could control who could and couldn't enter this part of the village, and Kakashi found them more annoying than Obito could ever be. Maybe it was a Uchiha thing, to annoy him to the grave. Confrontation was soon to start when the guards got a bit more aggressive when they tried to physically escort the newly promoted Jounin out of their way. It was only because of Rin's timely entrance that a fight hadn't escalated, but words on both sides had been exchanged between each other. Rin had been able to somewhat sedate her Jounin teammate and try to negotiate with the irritable Uchiha to no success. She concluded they wouldn't let them in when they continued to insult her and turned their noses up at her in superiority. Surprisingly, she found herself mad but deemed it necessary to keep it to herself. It wouldn't look good to stoop to their level when she had just spoken to Kakashi about that exact thing. When she walked back to where her teammate was still bristling under a rather large tree, she sighed. So, what do we do now? She had already run out of options if the diplomatic one had failed. Rather miserably too. What other option do we have other than sneaking in? She felt that it wasn't necessarily a question and had said nothing as her teammate began scanning the area, sending a glare at the Uchihas who were watching them like a hawk. He rolled his eyes in annoyance and turned away from the district, stalking away in quiet anger while Rin followed behind gingerly. She made attempts of asking him where they were going but stopped when she realized he would be giving her no response. He was purposely ignoring her when he knew he would most likely lash out to release his frustration. They walked in relative silence and Kakashi felt himself begin to calm down. He couldn't stay mad at dumb Uchiha who he didn't even know and wouldn't likely see again if he managed to avoid the Uchiha for the rest of his life. Though that might not be possible if his teammate was one. Finally, he spoke. We're going back to question Obito's clan leader. But this time, Guy will be coming with us. He would use his rival to distract the guards so they could get in without complication. Triple X. Obito transformed into the white-masked Toby as he landed on a building that would give him the perfect view as the Orochimaru slithered between the densely populated street below. Civilians hadn't even been able to touch him as he slipped through each of them, managing to avoid being touched a single time. He had barely even been noticed. Obito made sure to keep his eyes on the snake all the time, sure he would be able to sneak away at any point. Eventually, he did slip away not from Obito's eyes but from the large crowd of the busy street. Obito kept to the rooftops following the Sannin into a shadowy alleyway. He had gotten over his aversion to being near the Sannin, or suppressed it to the point where it wouldn't bother him. He thanked his iron nerves for that. Orochimaru was cautious and checked his back almost constantly, but Obito was much faster and was able to evade his sight and keep his chakra untraceable to even the best sensors. He could not afford to get caught before he even knew where the base was. Luckily, after minutes of silent following, Obito watched him enter some sort of hideaway door that seemed to blend in with the old, chipped wall and was attached to. His Sharingan found it was no type of genjutsu and it was simply a basic shinobi skill taught in the academy. With that he was able to hide from even the Hokage. Simple but effective. He waited patiently outside for about 10 minutes before heading inside himself. Upon entering he could immediately smell the smell of rotting flesh and burning chemicals that sent his senses into a frenzy. Experience kept the food in his stomach down as he waited until he got acclimated to the deep smells. A sense of freak crept over his shoulder and never left as he walked silently but steadily through the long corridor. Surprisingly, his mind hadn't asked why exactly he couldn't smell anything until he entered the hidden base, but he supposed it didn't matter in the long run. It would not get him what he came here for. And with all the nausea-inducing stench that nearly suffocated the air around him, he wanted to find that as soon as humanly possible. Keeping his entire body calm, he entered the first room of the long corridor. It was safe, he had sensed no one inside, but he had to be sure. This was Orochimaru, and what the snake lacked in strength, he made up for with a sound mind. Wait, did people with sound minds cut people open and experiment on them? Orochimaru was a case in of itself, but he was getting off topic. His base Sharingan glowering, ready to intercept any threat, he continued to look for the Senju cells around the giant lab. It was a long process. One, he had to be careful to keep quiet and search anywhere he was for traps or anything, especially if it were about anything important. Another thing was his curiosity. He saw that, similar to the hospital, Orochimaru owned a blood bank where he stored blood of individuals that interest him. He also kept an abundance of notes on particular individuals, and he didn't miss the lack of ones on him. He wasn't exactly noteworthy as a child. Dismissing those depressing thoughts, he suddenly froze. He felt a presence behind him. It was sinister, and if any other ninja felt it, they wouldn't be able to move because of the darkness that nurtured it. Feed it. Obito was no normal ninja. He turned in a swift but fluid motion and found the snake Sannin himself. He should have expected it, a part of him did. It was why he was able to show no emotion as the Sannin grew a smirk he was sure that could turn anyone unlike him pale upon seeing it. Orochimaru, he leveled the powerful shinobi with a gaze. The smirk from the Sannin didn't move as he chuckled humorously. So you know this is my lair, huh? What brings you to my humble abode? Hashirama cells. I'm looking for some. Silently, the Uchiha decided not to cut corners. He was confident he could defeat the snake if it came to it, but he preferred more peaceful means. At least for now. The words slide out of his mouth slowly, with a sort of hissing sound following. It made the Uchiha take in a calming breath. The air around this man, no, this monster, could do that to anyone. I've had a very interesting influx in customers these days. It's very interesting. Will you tell me, or no? His patience was already wearing thin. Let's not be hasty now. There's plenty of time for us to talk. Obito felt that oppressing air around the Sannin become more clearer, more thicker as he began to approach. Obito stood his ground. He was not afraid of Orochimaru. How do you know about my ingredients? How do you know about this place? The Sannin's warm breath hit his mask, but Obito was more than prepared to the horrid smell. He had to deal with much, much worse. I will be the one to ask the questions. His voice boomed in the hollow room filled with the decors of human innards. Kukoku, the snake chuckled in delight, the killing intent coming from Obito filling him with joy. He loved the feeling it gave him. Such wonderful chakra you have. You must be Madara Uchiha, correct? Obito hadn't moved after that. It looked as if he weren't even breathing as he stared openly at the Sannin with startling silence. It was quite for mere moments, but to Obito it felt longer. There was an unmistakable tension in the air and a commonly known question hanging in the air. Orochimaru was quick to catch on. He held up his arms to side, shrugging his thin shoulders. Of course you want to know how, Well, I suppose I'll tell you how I know of you. He paused, and Obito felt his gaze linger on the hole in his mask. He was looking at his Sharingan. For a price. Are you a fool? The Uchiha felt inclined to ask, tilting his head. Do you think I would give you my eyes? Orochimaru chuckled once more and shook his head. His long, black hair flailing a bit at the action. No, nothing like that. Why would I need your eyes if I can simply get one elsewhere? What I want is for you to give an eye from one of the other members. And if I refuse? Obito questioned before he could even think. It had come out before he could even control himself, but the threat was issued. He felt his senses screaming at him to move as the temperature of the room seemed to dip. Obito stood firm regardless, not showing a hint of weakness. He figured out the Sannin was trying to intimidate him. Before he could take in another breath, a snake shot at him from Orochimaru's mouth, but Obito noticed it was aimed a little high. He was going for his eye. With ease he grabbed the snake and began crushing it when it was only meters away from his mask. You dare try to strike me down? The Sannin didn't answer, but Obito received it anyway when a sword shot out of the snake's gaping hole and would have hit him had he not used the body flicker to gain distance. It was close as the hole in his mask had been penetrated and his eye was a short meter away from the blade. Before he landed on the ground, he launched a series of shuriken that the snake was not able to dodge. It cut into its skin with ease and forced Orochimaru to release it and jump away to avoid being impaled. Obito watched him land silently and spoke when the Sannin seemed to keep still. He wouldn't attack again. Not yet at least. Will you willingly give me what I want or will I have to force it out of you? The question elicited a response from Orochimaru. It was weird. He had seen a flicker of hesitation in the Sannin's eyes and stepped forward, further increasing the killing intent he let leak out of him. The room was getting so cold that breathing could actually be seen visibly, and a near-transparent, almost invisible dew that formed low to the ground. Then all of a sudden, to Obito's confusion, the Sannin began laughing. It wasn't maniacal. Obito could hear the genuine amusement in the deep laugh, which only fueled his amusement. Ah, he sighed to relieve his lungs after all the laughing. Don't worry, Madara Uchiha. I meant no harm by attacking you. I was simply testing your power to make sure you are who you said you are. Here, he held out a small vial of liquid that danced as it was moved. Obito watched it be set on the table beside them before the Sannin began to walk away. But not before saying, I hope we meet again, Madara-kun. After that Obito didn't see him again. Obito only stared down the long hall the Sonk had went into as the room's temperature began to stabilize. He only grunted in mild annoyance before grabbing the vial. He scanned the chakra within the vial and felt the familiar power of the legendary Senju. This was what he was looking for. With an abundance of effort, he activated his Mangekyo and a spiraling void appeared from his right eye. He quickly sucked the vial into his dimension in case of anything the snake would try to pull. He would not lose what he needed, and if he had to go a little more blind to do so, then so be it. He was acclimating to the pain, so his eyes didn't even bleed like that had at first. He supposed that was progress. With another body flicker, the time traveler was gone. Triple X. What's wrong with her, doctor? Minato was worried. Nothing was wrong with the seal, but the Nine-Tails chakra was leaking and left his wife in a coma. Once he had made it to the hospital, he told the desk the problem and she was immediately admitted into a room. He tried to come inside, arguing that he could help, but was promptly shut out. When Biwako, the third's wife, was allowed inside, an indignant squawk of protest was all he could let out before the women disappeared behind the doors. He sulked for a bit afterward but decided to come up with theories on the problem to pass the time, hoping that whatever the problem was that it wasn't too big and could easily be fixed. As soon as the doctor came out of the room, he was on her as fast as his title implied. "Oh," she replied in a flinch. Minato wanted to apologize. He was sure he had just scared the daylights out of her with his natural speed alone. Luckily, she gained her composure and went right back to being serious. "Minato-san, do you have any idea on what could be the problem?" At her desperate tone, Minato held in a flinch. "Was Kushina okay? What happened?" "No, ma'am. Everything was normal until moments ago, and everything regarding her is completely normal." The woman seemed to hold her breath for a second and released a small, quick breath to relieve her stress. "Her condition has worsened, I'm afraid. We've managed to stabilize her heart as it had stopped a couple of times with constant chakra flow directly to it." Minato was speechless. He couldn't react. He didn't know how. What was he to say? Kushina was dead a second ago and he didn't even know why. He clenched his fist, an unknown emotion rising in him. He turned his head away from the doctor, glad his bangs were long enough to cover his glistening eyes. "Crying is unbecoming of our future Hokage." A stern voice lashed out, bringing his head up forcefully. 1. He saw that it was Biwako that had replaced where the doctor was standing. She had most likely ushered her away. But nothing. She interrupted. "A Hokage takes the pain of the entire Leaf Village, Minato. Not only will you take on the responsibility of every citizen and shinobi alike, you will also take on their grief, their frustration, and their rage. You cannot falter under any circumstances. Understand?" Minato snuffled, the intense feeling of despair leaving his body. He wiped his eyes before Biwako spoke to him. "Kushina's seal holds strong and she is strong herself. She will fight whatever is happening and come back even stronger." "Thank you, Biwako-san. You don't know how much it means to me for you to say that." He bowed respectfully and she nodded. "Go see your wife." She turned away and added something a bit smirkingly. "Lord Fourth." She walked away right after and Minato rose fully up and smiled. With a smile still in place, he nodded in her direction and went inside Kushina's room. His mood immediately changed. Replaced with a rather somber frown, Minato dragged his feet until he was right beside his wife as she lay motionless in the bed. The room was silent, nothing but consistent beeping of a heart monitor tracking her heart rate, and if you listen close enough, soft breathing. With a shaky breath, Minato bent down until he was on his knees, looking at his wife's bedside. "I wish I could stay, Kushina, but Obito needs me." His beloved student was going through something that not even he could understand. He knew it had something to do with this. Kagaya person. The name itself, he felt a chill run down his spine if he even thought of it. The name held power of some sort, that he was sure of. He was scared. He grabbed her hand softly. "Please come back." Suddenly, red chakra sprung from where he was touching his wife. A red hue filled the room and Minato attempted to pull away but found that the chakra had actually materialized and held him from moving his arm. He tried to move to no avail and soon, he was unconscious. Minato muttered when he finally awoke. His vision was blurry and he could barely see his surroundings. He felt terrible and a splitting headache kept him in place. Eventually he got accustomed to the pain and his vision cleared. He looked beneath him, seeing a small pool of water, but his clothes didn't feel wet. He turned only his head to look behind him and froze instantly. Wide-eyed, he gulped. A deep, intense seemed to literally shake the area they were in as the sleeping beat behind a cage awoke, a single eye popping open. 9 tails. Minato could only muttered. Chapter 12. Almost immediately, Minato snapped from his panicked daze and leaped to his feet, pulling out one of his signature 3-pronged kunai. His eyes only showed focus and determination, no longer the scared, surprised it was before. He only gulped when the QB growled. They echoed off the walls and he could feel the oppressing air that surrounded the beast. He wondered where he was. Could he be inside the seal itself? Was that even possible? Maybe it was. The seal was created by who was considered one of the best seal masters to ever exist. The thought had sent a shiver down his spine. He was actually looking at the real beast. This was no illusion. It was at this point that Minato had noticed his wife standing right in front of the seal that was on the golden gate, staring at it intently. Kushina! He shouted before he could even think. The loud yell carried quickly over the barren room and she turned to her worried husband. Minato? He didn't hear her confused voice, reaching her as fast as his title implied, and grabbed her by the arm. Where are we? He questioned, gazing at the gate for any sign of movement. He wished she hadn't come so close, because he was beginning to feel a bit nauseous being so close to the demon. A gate that he wasn't even sure was secure was the only thing between them and certain death. That thought alone. I don't know. Kushina answers after a bit of silence. She hadn't reacted much to Minato's presence and he was beginning to get worried because of that. On top of that, she didn't know where they were either. I woke up in this place and now my stomach isn't hurting anymore. She continued, slowly rubbing the large bar on the gate. I have a theory. I think. He added, with uncertainty. We might be inside the seal. Like inside with the 9 tails. I thought that too, but this has to be somewhere else. She looked very insistent on what she said and Minato rose an eyebrow. When she turned to see why he had gone quiet, she saw the confused look and continued to speak her thoughts. This is not what the inside of the seal is supposed to look like. Now Minato was even more confused and looked up at the large bars keeping the 9 tails back. I don't get it, Kushina. Can you explain? She nodded. When one becomes a Jinchuriki, whether they have talked with their tailed beast or not, eventually they go into their mental state within the seal. Inside it is a physical manifestation of the seal as we see here. She rose her hand briefly, gesturing to the large cage before them. Minato nodded at the information, picking up on it quite easily from the very detailed and organized explanation given by his wife. He briefly went into thought. If this was true, would that be the reason a Jinchuriki and its tailed beast could actually talk regularly and even become synchronized? It was very interesting. The thought of a Jinchuriki of the hidden cloud popped into his mind. So, what you're trying to say is that this isn't the mindscape that you've accompanied with the 9 tails? She nodded again and turned to him. Yeah, pretty much. I don't know why it changed though. It should never do that. I suppose we should be grateful it's still intact rather than why it changed like this, at least for now. He told her. His face had softened and he slowly walked to her before wrapping her in a tight hug. He felt her stiffen in his arm before she relaxed and wrapped her arms around him. I thought I lost you. It's okay, Minato. She assured, placing her head on his chest. They had stayed like that for a small bit, but it seemed too fast for Minato, something he never thought he would say considering his title. Moments ago, his wife was dead. It may have been short-lived, but it scared the daylights out of him and he knew he couldn't fathom a world without her. A snarl broke them out of their hug and they turned to the source simultaneously. The wide, sharp grin of the 9 tails caused them to freeze as his eyes locked onto their forms. For a second, neither could think or even move and Minato felt a heavy feeling in his chest. It felt strange. Minato tensed when the 9 tails' long arm began to slowly reach out towards the gate. He would have seen Kushina's eyes lock onto the seal if he had been looking at her, but his gaze remained forward. His eyes widened and his body rocketed forward on pure instinct. 1 second he had grabbed Kushina and launched back as far away as he could, and the next second the large gate swung open in a flash, almost smacking into the duo. Minato's quick movements had saved them, but that wasn't what he was thinking about as he tried to stumble to his feet from the tumble of limbs that he and Kushina had turned into. "The seal is broken," Kushina muttered, voice trembling in fear as the Ninetales' giant arm went through the opening from the open gate. Minato felt a pant in his heart, and the wild beating that had thumped in his head like drums had now gone numb. He had never heard Kushina make any kind of sound like fear. She would look an enemy of any kind in the face without the least bit of apprehension. But this was the Ninetales. A bijou. One unlike any others. Somehow, Minato steeled himself and began to clear his mind. He knew that if the seal was broken then his wife would be dead, but clearly she was still alive. He didn't know what it meant besides that the seal was still intact, and that meant he had a chance to save her. He drew a calm breath as the beast fully emerged from its cage. He was ready and fully prepared to fight, only to receive a shock that left both him and Kushina stunned with wide eyes. The Ninetales fell over on its stomach in what seemed to be exhaustion. Before they could react, it spoke. "How are you two?" He stuttered in exhaustion. "What's going on? How am I not dead?" Desperation for answers clear on her face, she turned to Minato. "Minato, what's going on?" "I don't know," he answered truthfully before turning away, not wanting to see her face like that simply because he was not used to it. He steeled himself and began taking careful steps toward the downed beast who hadn't moved since he collapsed. "But I'll find out. First we need to contain him and then we'll question it. It's the only way to get any information." She seemed relieved that at least someone had an idea of what to do next. She followed her husband as he began to restrain the beast. Well tried. When he neared the beast, it lashed out violently and sent them both flying a couple meters back harshly into the ground. It roared loudly and its dark chakra flared before it unleashed its power all around itself and began to heal. "Don't touch me!" it roared. "This is some type of genjutsu, isn't it?" Minato felt Kushina tense so violently that he had to wonder why, but he got his answer when the bijou opened its large mouth and chakra began to gather in a tight dense ball. His eyes widened and the small pool of water around their ankles began to thrash wildly. Minato's kunai flashed out and struck the ground tens of meters away seconds before the Ninetales tilted its heads toward them and fired the large ball of chakra. Once again, Minato launched his body at Kushina and was able to grab her and teleport to his kunai just as the chakra hit the ground, causing an explosion that rocked the mindscape and sent the two flying to the ground even when they were safely away from behind hit. Minato grimaced and looked over to Kushina, briefly scanning her for injuries. No way were they fighting the actual Ninetales right now and surviving. "Minato, look out!" At Kushina's call, Minato's head snapped up and he saw a massive tail coming down onto him. This time he used the body flicker to back away from harm and the tail smashed into the ground before him, blocking his vision with dust and water. He skidded to a halt and looked around briefly for his wife and found her hunched over with a straining look of concentration on her face. Before he could even think, gold chains shot out of her back and began to latch onto and hook around the Ninetales, restraining it. Minato looked on in awe as the bijou tried to thrash around and stop the chains, but to no avail. After some time it finally realized it would not escape and released another roar that sent the water thrashing about once more, and this time, even produced cracks in the walls that surrounded them. Minato could only look at the struggling beast, not knowing what to feel. The power it possessed was off the charts, and now he knew why it was called the Demon Fox. He only hoped that it wouldn't be able to break out of those restraints, because other than using the Flying Thunder God to evade its attacks he had no answer to its unbelievable power. At least not yet. "Minato, I'm sending you out of here." Minato reacted well before he could even tell. "What are you talking about? I'm not leaving here on your own, Kushina. That's suicide." She closed her eyes in resignment. "I'm sorry, Minato." "Kushina, why?" He blacked out. XXX. Obito was very, very annoyed at the moment. He was sitting up on another forsaken hospital bed, foot hanging over the edge and swinging around absent-mindedly as he tried to keep himself from getting up and breaking out. During wartime, weekly checkups for cuts, bruises, or most importantly diseases were a must for any active shinobi, especially the disease. Cleanliness was not on the list of necessities during a war, and that very easily led to a pandemic that killed as many as a battlefield would. Sometimes more. It was for that reason that regular checkups could not be skipped under any circumstances, and if ones were injured, especially if it was fresh. He knew all of that, which was why he had initially went to the hospital. It was supposed to be a quick in and out, and it was going to be, until something else changed that entirely. He had yet to even begin treatment on the Hashirama cells he had gained, and while it was kinda his fault, he hated to admit. He had been sitting in the hospital room for so long that he had gotten bored and had started thinking. He guessed if he was going to be waiting a while that he could go ahead and start the treatment, but that required him to use Kamui once more. He could use Kamui once every 20 minutes with no problems like his eyes bleeding and his vision deteriorating, at least not too much. But it hadn't been 20 minutes since he last used Kamui to store that small vial, and as soon as he used it again to get the vial from his dimension, and then everything started going downhill from there. He had felt an intense pain that was even worse than when he had first used Kamui. He had doubled over, screaming loudly as it had felt like a screwdriver was being driven and twisted in his ear. Blood ran down his eyes, but unlike other times it seemed never-ending. Because of his screaming, doctors and nurses alike began rushing down the hall, and even when in intense pain he could hear them clearly. He muted his screams by biting his lips hard and was able to raise his head up to peer around the room with a single open eye. He saw the vial had fallen on the ground and went to pick it up. He managed to grab a hold of it just as the door to the room slammed open and doctors and nurses began to grab a hold of him, all very surprised by his heavily bleeding eyes and now bleeding lip. After being poked and prodded and examined, which had flowed by very fast since he nearly passed out because of the immense pain that wouldn't stop, he had woken up fully to his eye being wrapped up all the way up to around his forehead and the cut on his bottom lip bandaged up. That was what had brought him to his current predicament of being face to face with the frowning face of the leader of the Uchiha clan. There was a long silence ever since he got into the room, and at some point Obito was growing a bit anxious as the Uchiha just frowned at him, not uttering a single word. Obito had to wonder what the older man was thinking, but he didn't have to wait much longer. After a small bit, the older Uchiha sighed tiresomely, ducking his head as it shook side to side slowly. "Must you always find a way to get on my nerves? What are you here for?" Obito asked, crossing his arms. Fugaku glared with a snort. "The Mangekyo is no longer a secret to only me." From this little, whatever this is, he had struggled to find the right word, it seemed. "The elders have knowledge of your secret." For his credit, Obito didn't visibly react, but he couldn't help from reacting at all. His heart felt as if it dropped to his stomach and he gulped inaudibly. That was not good. This would compromise keeping a low profile if he was watched so carefully like he suspected he would be now. Perhaps he was already being watched. Obito's eyes darted around the room, but he could not sense anyone beyond the Uchiha before him. He supposed he was okay for now. There were not a lot of ninja that could hide their presence from him after all. "What do you suppose we do about that?" Obito asked, slowly. He let his body relax and bent over slightly. It was Fugaku's turn to fold his arms. "That depends on you. I get the feeling you know that they will be coming after you with the intention to bring you back into the clan." Surprisingly, Obito still hadn't showed any emotion and Fugaku's eyes narrowed so minutely that Obito somehow missed it. "I have a request of you," he said. "If you can buy me at least a week and hold off those elders, then I'll begin training Itachi immediately." The elder Uchiha hummed after a bit of staring. He stared. Obito didn't know what it meant or what was going through his mind, but he got a creeping sense that it would not be something good. "Of course," he nodded. "I could do that, but I would like a request of my own." "That depends on what you want." Obito interrupted, speaking quickly. He wanted the elder Uchiha to know his intentions right off the bat. He would not agree with just anything. Obito watched in slight confusion as Fugaku slowly closed his eyes. He felt a slight pulse of chakra come from the elder Uchiha but would get a surprise when the chief of police opened his eyes to reveal his own unique pattern of the Mangekyo Sharingan. This time Obito could not hide his shock as his mouth gaped open like a fish. With a single eye, his own Sharingan activated to confirm what he was seeing was true, but it was. When did this happen? Originally, Fugaku never had the Mangekyo, or it wasn't known that he had it. WN. Obito, I will agree to your request if you explain in detail about the powers your Mangekyo gives you. If not, the way his eyes hardened as if facing a threat made Obito's heart began to beat fiercely and actually apprehensive. I will be forced to say you are a threat to not only yourself but to Konoha and kill you on the spot. The ultimatum given, they both looked into the other's eyes with a tense silence. So tense that anyone who walked into the room could suffocate from the massive pressure the two were giving out, clashing with one another. This was actually troublesome for Obito. Revealing the secrets of his jujutsu could have drastic effects on not only the fate of the Uchiha but of the Leaf as a whole and most importantly him. He could not save the world if he died this early, but having his weaknesses out like that would not end well. But what could he do? He was very likely to lose if he actually fought Fugaku the way he is now. No, it is almost certain. Obito deactivated his Sharingan and lowered his head, conceding. I agree to your terms, Fugaku. He raised his head back up, looking the man in the face for any sign of deceit. But, I'll need assurance you'll hold your end of the deal. Obito felt his muscles relax when the other man deactivated his Mangekyo Sharingan and nodded diplomatically. Of course. I have no reason to deceive you in any way. So they talked about everything for almost an entire hour. Triple X. Finally, muttered Kakashi as he looked at a brightly lit, high-end restaurant labeled Daishiris Dashi. It was in the middle of the busiest part of the entire village and was rightfully just as busy seeing as the entire place was almost full of customers. What did we walk all the way over here for? He heard Rin ask and would have saw her face twisted in confusion if he had been turned around. You'll see. He said. Just follow me. We don't have much time before we set out on our mission early in the morning tomorrow. Team Minato was set to leave for Canopy Bridge by first daybreak and the warm colors and the lowered sun in the sky showed just how late into the evening they were in. They only had a couple of hours left. Quietly, he walked into the large building with Rin following and was immediately greeted with a very pleasant smell of delicious food. He hadn't eaten the entire day and knew that when Rin had heard the way his stomach churned around, but he ignored it. He would deal with it later. Keen eyes searched every single face in view until he found the three he was looking for. They were on the other side of the room. He walked over quickly but carefully, not wanting to put any attention on himself by causing a scene. When he reached the table, all eyes were on him. He saw exactly who he was looking for. Ganma, Ebisu, but most importantly Guy. Said green spandex wearing ninja jumped up at the sight of him, landing on the table loudly and did exactly the opposite of what Kakashi wanted. Drawing attention. Rin behind him winced and looked around awkwardly at all the eyes on them, but Guy didn't even seem to notice them. Kakashi, my dear rival, he shouted enthusiastically, giving a thumbs up while grinning. I have not seen you in days. What have you been? Our daily competitions have been compromised. Must you be so loud? Ganma sighed but decided to mind his own business while Ebisu glared, glancing over at him. He most likely thinking how embarrassing this was. Guy, Kakashi spoke with all seriousness, ignoring the eyes on them and Guy's usual enthusiasm. I need you to do me a favor. Seriously. Head cocked to the side in curiosity, Guy asked, what's going on, my dear rival? I need to get in the Uchiha district for very important business. He explained. I need you to go in and distract the guards that are guarding the entrance. What do you guys need to do that for? Kakashi turned his head to see Ganma staring at him with an expecting look. I do not approve. Ebisu stated, brushing his glasses up his nose. That is unbecoming of a ninja of your rank, Kakashi. Are you letting that fool Obito change you? It's nothing like that. Rin interrupted with a small smile, hands out in a surrender-type fashion. And guy, you should really get off the table, people are staring. Of course, he said with a thumbs up and performed a front flip of the table. He turned to Kakashi. Now what was it, Kakashi? Ebisu stood up from the table and it rattled when his palm slammed on it. I will not let my teammate get involved in your schemes, Kakashi. Ganma sighed lowly and grabbed his teammate's wrist with a pointed look. Let him talk. You haven't even given him a chance to explain. And sit down, you're causing a scene. All of the young shinobi glanced over around them to see the peering, curious eyes of almost every other people in the room staring at them. Kakashi even felt a bit awkward. TCH, fine, the genin grumbled, taking his seat, and a second later Ganma removed his own hand before sending Kakashi an expecting look. It was Kakashi's turn to sigh. He wished it would have taken so long just to grab one person. He almost considered grabbing Guy and using the body flicker to escape, but it seemed a bit rude. And he knew Rin would not agree. It's about Obito. Kakashi started before being immediately interrupted by Ganma, who he shot a small glare at. He couldn't explain if he couldn't talk after all. Obito? Ganma asked confusingly. I thought he was in a hospital or something. How do you know about that? Rin asked with a small tilt of her head. They were barely allowed to know when they were his teammates. It was a rumor going around that he had awakened his Sharingan and somehow got in the hospital with some injuries related on it. The next words the shinobi said was directly to Kakashi, as he must have seen the look in his eyes and knew what he was about to ask. I don't know who started the rumor, but I can tell where I heard it. It was from the inside of a dango shop. Specifically, the one downtown. Near the Forest of Death. That didn't really help, but it was something the Hatake supposed. He gave a nod before continuing to explain. He wasn't interrupted this time. Well, from what you said, Ganma, Obito is in the hospital and we wanted more information on the Sharingan because it seemed to be actually hurting him. Seriously? Ganma asked with a raised eyebrow. He hadn't heard of a Sharingan that hurt the individual bearing it. But the Uchiha are very secretive when it comes to the ocular power. Yeah, Kakashi nodded. Then of course I'll come, Kakashi, Guy nearly yelled, getting very close into his personal space. Kakashi tried to inch back, but Guy was very persistent at the moment. Obito is a precious comrade of mine. His pain shall not go without resolve. Good, great, he muttered, head leaned away from Guy. Can you back up now? Ebisu looked over to Rin. Take him. We'll just tell Choza-sensei that it was urgent. Rin bowed her head. Sorry if we took him away from something important. We'll definitely make it up to guys. Come on, Rin. Let's get going. Kakashi called out from a bit of a distance with Guy following. She nodded and left, waving behind her as she did. Triple X. Minato awoke suddenly with a gasp for air and shot out of his bed. His eyes darted around the room and he saw the stunned faces of nurses and doctors alike and that he was in a hospital bed. Wa dash. Minato-sensei? He turned to his left and saw both Obito, who was wrapped up in bandages, and Fugaku. What are you doing here? Hey! A doctor interrupted quite loudly. You guys can't be in here. He was ignored by both Uchiha as they walked up to the bed he was sitting up in. Fugaku crossed his arms and asked, What the hell happened to you, Minato? Minato's gaze lowered to his lap and he racked his brain for answers. I don't know. Suddenly his eyes shot open wide and both Fugaku and Obito had to step back when he shot out of the bed and looked at them both as if he had just seen a ghost. Kushina. Where is Kushina? She's here too? Obito muttered, now looking lost. Please don't get out of bed. A doctor yelled to no avail as the yellow flash did just as his title implied and was gone out of the room before his question could even be answered. There's no way that the seal could be broken and the Ninetales hadn't broken out. What's going on? He thought, landing silently on a cold floor before looking around him. He saw the stunned faces of the Hokage and Biwako as they stood over a lifeless Kushina on a large metal table that didn't look the least bit comfortable. "Hokage-sama, stop. Don't touch her," he yelled desperately with his arm outstretched. The Hokage paused right before touching Kushina but gave Minato a strange look. The room was quiet for a couple of seconds save for Minato's tired pants. Once he caught his breath he rose to his feet and practically ran to the Hokage. "You have to get out of here. It's too dangerous to be near her right now." "What are you talking about, Minato?" Biwako demanded, looking almost as confused as her husband. He whirled around to her after blocking off Hiruzen. "The Nine Tails is out. The seal is broken." "What?" they both demanded simultaneously. "The seal that was keeping the Nine Tails locked away not only changed but is completely open, and if you touch Kushina you'll be transported inside the seal and you'll have to fight that beast," he explained quickly. "Oh, Kami," Hiruzen sighed, lowering his head. Minato never saw that man this way, but he could actually see the stress on the Hokage's face. "We need to put the village on high alert until further notice. We may even need to pull out of the war," he said grimly. Minato grimaced. That would seriously put them at risk if their enemies thought that they were too weakened to. "We can't do that," Biwako said. "That would only give our enemies the impression that we're too weak to continue fighting in the war. That would only invite an invasion." Hiruzen hummed. "Then what do you propose we do?" "I propose we send Team Minato out immediately." Minato turned to her with all the surprise his face could muster. "We could deal with this problem ourselves. We're very close to cutting Iwagakure's supply chain off, and that'll definitely take them out of the war, or at the very least slow them down." "I refuse," Minato said. They both turned to him, surprised at the sudden statement. "Hokage-sama, you told me that I had a few days to sort out Obito's behavior and make sure that my team is ready, but with all of this going on now I don't think I am. Please find another team suitable enough." They both only stared at his lowered head for a few moments before Hiruzen lowered his own and let out a disappointed sigh. "You put the life of a single person over thousands. I don't think you are the successor the Hidden Leaf needs." Hiruzen walked around the table and was almost outside of the door before he paused. "For your sake and for the sake of the entire Leaf Village, I hope your decision is the correct one." Saying that, he left without so much as a single sound. That hurt. It felt like he had just disappointed his grandpa. The most important grandpa in his whole village. "While my husband may have said that the decision is final, I will be able to persuade him otherwise, but I can only promise a couple of hours," Biwako explained, and she walked up to him and laid a hand on his shoulders. "Make the responsible decision, Minato. I think that the rest will all fall together." "Thank you, Biwako-san." She nodded and left after her husband without another word. It took Minato a few seconds to turn to his wife, but when he did he could take his eyes off her. He rubbed down her arm and grabbed her hand, hoping that he would get the similar feeling of getting inside her mindscape to no avail. "I know I'm being selfish, Kushina, and I know I don't need to be this way, but dash." Minato-sensei, he froze and turned to the door behind him to see his student, Obito. "What's going in here?" Chapter 13. I got up from bed groggily, rubbing my eyes from sleeping before turning my alarm off. This was the first event of my life where everything turned to shit. I yawn as I get ready for today's mission, hoping I won't screw up. 1. I jump from roof to roof over shops and people. I'm kinda nervous about this mission and it's unnerving me. I haven't felt nervous in 16 years and it comes all of a sudden I would do something to anybody. I stop as I reach the training field where my team was already there waiting for me. I was gonna wait an hour, but my nerves got the best of me, making me only a few minutes late. I got surprised looks as I walked into the clearing. I guess they expected me to be my usual hour late, which isn't out of reason. I smiled brightly despite how I felt on the inside. "Hey guys, sorry I'm late." "Well, you aren't that late. You okay, Obito?" As his blue eyes looked over me. I swear his eyes looked like they could see into your soul. 1. I raised an eyebrow at his question. Was it so weird I was only a little late? What do you mean? Well, you're always an hour late, so I thought something was wrong if you were only 5 minutes late, Minato explained while both his other students nodded. I waved a hand dismissively. Nah, I just woke up early and couldn't go back to sleep. Minato gave me another look before clasping his hands. Well, come on, we have a mission and so we need to report to the Hokage. We walked to the office in complete silence. I usually started the conversations in my team, and if I didn't usually strike one up, then it was silence. When we finally entered the Hokage's office, we were briefed on stuff like the last time before we were sent off. As we went to the place where we were meant to split up, as last night it was announced that Kakashi made Jounin and would lead Rin and me to destroy the bridge while Sensei would go assist an almost destroyed Leaf platoon. Third-person POV. Alright, Minato looked at his students as we're supposed to split up. He didn't like the feeling he was getting and decided to finish his mission as fast as possible. He thought about voicing his thoughts but refrained from doing so as he didn't want his team thinking that he didn't believe in their ability to complete their mission. This is where we split up. Good luck. Disperse. And they were all off. Obito, Kakashi, and Rin wasted no time in going to their mission. On the way there they sometimes argued and sometimes worked together, getting closer as a couple of days passed on. They stopped to take one final break as their target was in sight. They were all tense as they were going into enemy territory. It was worst for Obito. He hadn't wanted to be here even though he needed to be. He kept getting constant flashbacks that made him remember things he was pushing down deep inside him. And the more closer they got to their objective, the more flashbacks he'd get. Kakashi looked up from a map that was in his hand. This was his first mission as a Jounin and he didn't want to screw up. He knew this mission could end the war a few months earlier if he didn't screw up. And so he took heavy precaution as to what they would do, how they would do it, and when. Which created arguments with Obito, but he didn't care. Kakashi turned to Obito, looking over his features thoroughly. Obito, you okay? Obito's head tilted to the forest in front of the group as he felt something coming. It was that same IWA shinobi. The IWA shinobi threw a volley of kunai at Obito and Kakashi. It was so many it took them both to deflect them. Obito's mind went to what was supposed to happen while they were being distracted. He quickly turned to look where Rin was and found her knocked out with another IWA shinobi holding her. Obito rushes the enemy Nin holding Rin. Hey, let her go. The shinobi from earlier with two blades coming off his forearm rushes Obito from his side. Don't forget about me. The IWA Nin said with a smirk as he swiped his blades at Obito. Obito dodges each strike and leaps back to where Kakashi was. Both IWA shinobi stood there holding Rin while smirking. Hey, let her go. Obito yelled, getting ready to charge again. This time he was gonna kill them both for even looking at Rin. A hand landed on his shoulder, stopped him as he turned to regard it. Kakashi looked calm and collected as he assessed the shinobi in front of him. What will you do to her? Sensing the chakra meaning that hasn't killed her. That means they needed something from her, most likely information. Just get some information. The one with the blade said as lifted Rin's face by her hair. Then they disappeared in a puff of smoke. Obito looked at Kakashi. He had to teach the idiot Jounin the same lesson, but he didn't mind. After all, it made Kakashi a better person. Kakashi, let's go after them. Kakashi was looking down, stealing his emotions. You and I need to continue with the mission on our own, Kakashi said as he looked up at Obito with a blank face. Do you hear yourself? They've got Rin and we need to go after her. We can worry about Rin later. They need her for information so they won't kill her straight away. He looked down again. It hurt him saying this, but he couldn't shake off the memories of his father. We should be more worried that they'll know our tactics. To a ninja, his mission is above everything. That is the ninja code. Obito grabbed the straps of Kakashi's clothing. Screw the ninja code. If abandoning a friend is a part of being a ninja, then I'll change it. Rin is a priceless friend. She healed us every time we got injured, and she was there for us when we needed her. Kakashi looked at Obito in the eyes, knowing that he loved being a part of Team 7, but breaking the ninja code caused death. She did that because it was part of her mission. Obito let go of him as he glared at him. Forget it, we were never on the same page anyway, he said as he turned around and began walking away. Kakashi looked up, troubled by the thoughts of his father. You don't know what happens to people who break the ninja code. Obito stopped but didn't turn around. Those who break the ninja code are trash, but Obito turned his head slightly to see Kakashi with his left eye. Someone that doesn't care about their friends is worse than trash, he finished as he leaps away. Obito, knowing exactly where they are, heads there as fast as he can. He runs into the spots of the familiar cave. He inclines his head as he thinks how fighting IWA shinobi in a cave would be a good idea. He shakes his head as he knows he just would get rid of them before they got a chance to do anything. He runs into the cave and spots Rin slumped up against the wall as the bigger shinobi has her in a genjutsu. His partner comes in front of his teammate with a grin. We honestly didn't think you'd come. What could you do by yourself, kid? Save my teammate, Obito said as he took out 2 kunai and charged at the IWA shinobi. Obito's kunai clashes with the blades on the IWA shinobi's forearms. I'll show you what happens when you mess with my teammates, he said as they both leaped back. The shinobi smirked, bringing one of his blades beside his face. Bring it, kid. And with that, they went into a straight taijutsu battle. Obito was being cautious as to not cause anything to happen to his teammate. It was risky, but he wanted to wait until Kakashi came. He didn't want much to change from the original timeline, because then coming to the past wouldn't matter if he didn't know what was gonna happen. As he dodged another strike, he leaps back as he feels Kakashi's chakra outside the cave. As Kakashi entered the cave, Obito didn't turn to look at him. I thought you weren't coming. He walked beside me and glanced at me. Well, I couldn't leave a crybaby on his own, could I? Obito just smiled. I'll help you, Kako. Just in case. The one who had Rin came and stood beside his partner. Obito and Kakashi glanced at each other before doing hand signs for a jutsu. Fire style, fireball jutsu. They yelled in sync as the medium-sized fireballs combined and created a large one. The 2 IWA nin, although caught off guard, jump away, splitting up in the process. Kakashi and Obito went after Taiseki first, as that was the plan they went with. Kakashi jumped and threw a volley of kunai at Taiseki. Taiseki deflected them as Obito charged behind him, fist ready. Obito's movements were stopped as the other IWA nin Kako jumped in his way. We're gonna kill you, leaf brats, Kako said as he charged at Obito. Obito got his guard up as the enemy nin swapped at him with the blades on his hand. Kakashi, I got this one, go after the other one, he said as he blocked the enemy's attack and countered with a kick. Obito dodges each attack that Kako sends but doesn't land a hit on the guy. Obito was trying to move the battle away from Rin as it was getting drawn over in her direction. He didn't want anything to happen to her, and it kept him going all out. Kako smirked as he figured out what the boy was doing. Hey Taiseki, kill the girl now. Obito looked at Kakashi, noticing that the other ninja threw a smoke bomb at him and Kakashi wasn't gonna be able to help. He turned quickly to Rin to see if he could find the shinobi but got kicked in the gut by Kako. Obito fell to the ground and got up at the exact moment that Taiseki was right in front of him with a kunai in hand. It's over, kid, he said as he swung the kunai at Obito. Obito closed his eyes, but knowing that if he got cut I'd just heal because of the Senju cells. But he didn't feel the blade pierce his skin. Obito opened his eyes to his teammate's back as his eyes widened. Kakashi landed on the ground screaming as he held his eye. Obito ran to his side before throwing a smoke bomb. Kakashi, you okay? Kakashi sat up while still holding his eye. I'm fine. Don't start crying, let's finish them. Obito held his hand out, gathering the 6 paths chakra he had in his body. He remembered the sage of 6 paths saying he had kept his chakra, meaning he still had 6 paths chakra in himself. He brought his hand up to Kakashi's eye as he used his other hand to remove Kakashi's hand away. Kakashi flinched away as soon as the chakra reached his eye. "What are you doing?" Obito looked at him seriously. "Stop moving and let me try something." Kakashi stares at Obito before nodding for him to continue. Kakashi didn't know what Obito was doing, but he hoped it wouldn't hurt. Obito put his chakra-infused hand back over his friend's eye until he felt like he should stop. When he removed his hand before his eyes widened as he looked at his friend's eye. He expected his eye to regenerate, but his pupils were a turquoise. It had the same color as when Kakashi had used the Susanoo himself, while the rest of his eye was normal. Kakashi grabbed his eyes as he looked at Obito. He could see a lot better in the eye, but his chakra was draining. "Obito, what did you do?" Chapter 14. Obito froze as he mulled over the question himself. He didn't know what he did, he just thought that he would be healing Kakashi. Taiseki the Iwa Nin looked around at the smoke around him before smirking. "We'll use this smoke to our advantage. Camouflage jutsu," he said as he turned invisible to the naked eye. He ran up behind a distracted Obito as he readied his kunai to kill. Kakashi, seeing the chakra of the hidden shinobi, reacted as he leaped over Obito and stabbed the Iwa Jounin. Kakashi glared intensely at the Jounin. "I won't let you hurt my friends anymore," he said before the Jounin dropped dead before him. Obito, with his Sharingan active, turned to look at Kakashi before smiling. "Obito, I'll take the lead, back me up," he said as he took out his white light blade and charged at the Jounin. Kakashi leaps at Kako, bringing his blade down on the Jounin. The Jounin blocks with his blade and pushes Kakashi back as Obito leaped in the air and tried kicking the Jounin on the side of his head. The Jounin did a handstand backflip and kicked at Obito as he blocked. The kick sent Obito back, but Kakashi soon took his place and deflected the blade sent his way. Pushing the blade to his side, he jumped over the other blade and tried striking the Jounin, but the Jounin again deflected his strike while airborne and sent his own. Kakashi sidestepped it and jumped back as another strike followed. Obito jumped in with a kunai in hand and swung at the Jounin as he deflected both strikes and extended his arms in an attempt to cut his throat. Obito leaned back as the blades went past his face. Kakashi jumped in the air and prepared to strike the Iwa Nin. The Iwa Nin smirked as he brought his arms back to strike Kakashi. Obito, predicting Kako's movements, put his legs on both sides of the enemy Nin's arm as Kakashi sliced his shoulder with his blade. Both Konoha Nin leaped away as the shinobi almost fell to the ground. You little brats," Kako yelled in anguish as he charged at Kakashi. "Fire style, fireball jutsu," Obito yelled as he released a medium-sized fireball from behind Kako. The fireball hit Kako, stopping him from moving as pain seared through his body. "Kakashi, sync with me," Obito yelled as he pulled a kunai and infused fire on it. Kakashi didn't say anything as he charged up his newly mastered Chidori. They both rushed the Iwa Jounin and struck him, sending fire and lightning through his body until he fell on the ground dead. 1. Kakashi and Obito both ran to Rin's slumped body. "Release," Kakashi muttered as soon as they reached her. Her eyes immediately opened as she looked at both of them. She looked at Kakashi and went wide-eyed. "Kakashi, your eye, what happened?" "I don't know myself, but right now we need to get out of here," he said as he got up from his crouch position and extended his arm towards Rin. Rin used his hands to get up while Obito also got up, happy that none of his teammates were hurt. "You saved the hostage, but let your guard down," a voice said, making them all turn to it. Damn it, Obito wasn't paying attention, and if he did he would have to sense them before they got here. "Die, you leaf brats." "Earth style, rock breaker." The Iwa Nin yelled as they left the cave and rocks all around Team 7 started to fall. "Run for the exit," Kakashi yelled as they all started running out of the cave. Obito felt like the rocks were coming down faster than last time, and so he had to act fast. He activated his Mangekyo and used Kamui on every rock he saw and ignored the surprised looks of his teammates. Even if they were surprised, they kept running as they were almost there. Obito wasn't protecting himself as he was so focused on making sure no rock would hit his teammates. It was getting too much as he felt myself begin to get tired. He gained the chakra he had when he was an adult, but not the same amount, and he was using a lot of it as he used Kamui so many times. He started to slow down as the exhaustion was getting to him. "Obito, above you!" Rin yelled, but to no avail as I was too slow and the rock slammed on my body, making Kakashi and Rin stop. 1. He felt pain as the rock crushed half his body. Just because he had Senju cells didn't make it hurt any less. He wasn't too worried about his body as he knew the Senju cells would heal him. Obito closed his visible eye as he heard Kakashi and Rin get up. "Obito! No!" Kakashi yelled as he ran and tried desperately to lift the boulder. "It's okay, Kakashi. Take Rin and go," Obito said as he felt even more reinforcements were on the way. Kakashi fell to his knees and punched the ground with his fist. "Obito, I'm so sorry. If I had listened to you from the beginning, then none of this would have happened," he said devastatingly. "Obito, no." "Why?" Rin muttered with a devastated face. Hearing those two like this made Obito wanna cry. He needed to get them out of here before they used that other jutsu that would make the cave cave in on itself. "You have to get out of here now. Reinforcements are on the way," Obito said in a desperate attempt to get them out faster. Things have changed and he didn't want them in this cave any longer. Kakashi looked up at the hole that was open above them, letting in a little sunlight. He debated whether leaving was the best idea, but if he couldn't save Obito, he wouldn't lose Rin. He jumped out of the cave as Rin took Obito's hand. "Rin, why, you have to go. I don't want you to die," Obito said as his vision was starting to blur. He wasn't gonna die, but he'd probably go unconscious. He didn't want Madara to get him while he was unconscious, and so he'd teleport himself to his dimension with his left eye before he went unconscious. But, Obito. She started before she was cut off. "Rin, we need to go, come on," he said as he leaned down and extended his hand to Rin. He didn't know why, but he felt that Obito would be okay. "Kakashi, please take care of Rin," I said as I looked up at him to see him nod. Outside reinforcements arrived and saw Kakashi's legs hanging from the cave. "Earth-style, earthquake slam!" A shinobi yelled as a jutsu activated and started a cave-in. As the rocks started to cave in, Obito panicked as Rin was still in the cave. "Rin, go with Kakashi now," he yelled as Rin broke and gave him one last look before she took Kakashi's hand and left the cave. As the cave started to collapse, Obito used his left eye and teleported to his dimension. As he arrived, he soon fell unconscious as his body started to heal. 1. "I'll kill you all," Kakashi yelled as he charged a Chidori in one hand and took out Minato's special kunai that was given to him by the latter for becoming a jounin. He charged at the reinforcements, striking some with his Chidori. The rest surrounded him as his jutsu died off from lack of chakra. Before going unconscious to chakra exhaustion, he threw Minato's kunai. The reinforcements laughed at his attempt before stopping as Konoha's yellow flash appeared out of nowhere before them. And in a flash dispatched the reinforcements in seconds, leaving no survivors. Minato walked to where Kakashi laid on the ground before picking him up and throwing him over his shoulder. He walked to Rin after seeing no sign of his other student. "Rin, where is Obito?" "He's dead," Rin answered, looking up at her sensei with tears in her eyes. Minato was shocked and it saddened him, but he knew that he had to be strong for his other students. He hugged Rin as he teleported straight to Konoha. First-person POV. I woke up to the smell of blood all around me. It was probably mine, I thought as I slowly sat up and looked around at my dimension. I sighed in relief before I stood up, feeling the side of my face that was crushed under the rock. The scar was there, but I supposed that I used to it, so I didn't dwell on it. I was low on chakra and I wouldn't be able to take Madara's chakra if I couldn't even activate my Mangekyo. I reached into my ninja pouch and retrieved a food pill I had bought before I met up with my team. I took them and immediately felt their effects. I wasn't exhausted anymore and all my chakra came back. I activated my Mangekyo and teleported out of my dimension. I teleported myself back to the battlefield I was just in to see dead bodies everywhere. I guess Sensei came to kill them or Kakashi did. I used my Mangekyo again and teleported straight to the mountain's graveyard. And when I take his chakra I'll kill him and rid the world of him. Chapter 15. I teleported myself to the entrance of the place where Madara kept me. To be honest, I kinda didn't know what I was getting myself into. I knew for a fact that Zetsu was spying on me, but I don't know for how long. I am a sensory type, but you can't sense Zetsu, so it doesn't mean much. He's probably expecting me, but it's now or never. I want to get back to Konoha as fast as possible for my teammates and my students. I used Kamui to make myself intangible before walking through the barrier. I looked around at the familiar place and frowned at the memories I got. After I became Madara's puppet, I used this as my base just as he did. Shaking my head, I walked through several more barriers before I reached the spot there the demonic statue is in Madara. I walked to him slowly and carefully and looked around everywhere for traps or Zetsu. "Hello, Obito Uchiha," a gruffly voice said, making me stop in place. Madara spoke with his eyes closed as if I wasn't a threat. "Madara Uchiha, I've come to kill you," I said darkly as I didn't move but still surveyed the room carefully. I knew Madara wasn't dangerous right now, but I was worried about Black Zetsu the most. He was sly and I didn't want him sneaking up on me and controlling my body. I watched Madara as he slowly opened his eyes to assess me. "Is that so?" he asked, stoic and unmoving. "How do you even know of my existence?" I remained stoic myself but was on guard as I was looking for Black Zetsu. I didn't want to almost have Madara and then to have my body controlled. "You've been spying on me for a while now. Why would that make you want to kill me?" he asked, carefully assessing my features with his one visible eye. I narrowed my eyes at him. "I know of your plans, Madara. You won't have your way with the world." His gaze intensified as he mulled over my words. "Do you understand the world we live in?" he asked as his facial expression calmed. "We live in a world full of death and pain. A world that is ruled by hatred, and if you know of my plan then you know how I'll get rid of all that for everyone's benefit." Every word that came out of his mouth made me want to choke him and set him on fire. "Your plan is not for everyone's benefit. It is so you can play dictatorship and rule the world the way you want it to be." 1. Such a naive way of thinking. Without someone guiding the world from hell to heaven, it will always stay the same. He explained. You can't force peace on people. The only true way for peace to be obtained is to understand one another and communicate. Forcing peace won't make peace, all it's gonna create is distrust, anger, and eventually war. I explained to Madara the same lesson I had to learn. 2. He closed his eye as he seemed to relax on his makeshift throne. There is no understanding of one another. If it were that simple then it would have been done a long time ago. The only concrete way to create peace is force. What people think about it doesn't matter, he said as he opened his visible eye. I sighed internally as I knew that talking to him wouldn't change his mind. If Naruto couldn't do it, then what made me think I could? I walked up to him still as carefully as possible. As I stepped in front of him, he closed his eyes and didn't make a move. I'll be back to kill you, he stated stoically. No, you won't, I stated harshly as I grabbed his throat and started taking his chakra. I took all I could before I let go of him and cut off his connection to the statue. He started to die slowly as I watched him carefully as I wanted to make sure he was dead. He opened his eye as he activated his Sharingan and with his dying breath uttered one word. Izanagi. I knew what that was and expected him to come back to life, but never did. The cave started to rumble as rocks started to fall down all around me. I activated my Mangekyo and teleported out of the cave. I looked around at the rubble after the collapse, but I couldn't find the statue, just Madara's body. I burned Madara's body as I tried to figure out what he used Izanagi on. I teleported away from the scene unaware of a body coming from the rubble. 7. I stopped in a forest as I deactivated my Sharingan. I didn't have another food pill and I didn't know what I would encounter and I wanted to be careful. I started walking to Konoha as it was only a couple of days away. I wondered how long it would take my Rinnegan to activate. Several days later. I could see the village gate from where I was as I started to run when I got in the land of fire. I started to walk up to the village gates as I sensed guards run up to me. "Who are you and what's your business in the leaf?" one of the guards asked. I looked them over silently, taking in the on-guard postures. "Obito Uchiha and I'm coming to reunite with my team." They narrowed their eyes as they looked at me. "Obito Uchiha is dead. Who are you?" "If you don't believe me, I'll go with you to confirm it," I said hastily. They looked at each other before two came forward. "Come with us." I stepped forward as they held both my arms as we made our way to the Hokage's office. It was a silent journey, but I did get a few looks as we walked through the village. When we reached the office and finally got in front of the Hokage, I explained my made-up story to him. "I'll have to run tests on you to make sure you are who you say you are, as I don't want to have an enemy ninja in the village. Understand?" he explained whilst I nodded. I was taken to a room where I sat and waited for the results. I expected the Hokage to come to deliver the news, but it was my team. They came into the room as their eyes lingered on my scars. "Obito, you're alive?" Kakashi asked first, causing Minato and Rin to both ask me a bunch of questions. Not good at writing emotional scenes, so we'll skip it. Third-person POV. I'd love to eat some ramen right now. I'm really hungry. Obito said as they left the Hokage's office and headed into the village. "Yes, we'll go after you. Go and tell your students you're alive," Sensei said as he looked down at Obito. Kakashi and Rin looked at Obito surprised. "Students?" Obito scratched his head as he grinned brightly. "Yeah, I'm training 2 Uchihas from my clan." "Why'd they ask you to train them?" Rin asked curiously as we turned a corner. Obito just shrugged as he didn't want to answer the question. Kakashi looked at Obito, noting how he didn't answer the question. Kakashi would have persisted, but he didn't really care and he had a better question for the Uchiha. "Hey Obito," Obito turned to regard his teammate before Kakashi continued. "What did you do to my eye?" With that question, all eyes were on Obito as he sighed internally, knowing he couldn't avoid this question. "That's what I want to know. All I did was try to heal it," he answered as he stopped walking, causing the rest of the team to. Minato stared at Obito's facial expression, looking for any trace of a lie. When he knew Obito wasn't lying, he sighed outwardly, gaining his team's attention. "We've tested his eye ability." He put a hand on his chin. "They are strangely similar to the Sharingan. Hokage-sama classified it as a new jujutsu. But what I'm trying to figure out is how was it activated?" "Well, when that IWA name cut Kakashi's eye, all I did was channel chakra to my hand and put it over his eye," Obito said, gaining his team's attention. "Well, I guess we'll never know," Minato said before walking, which caused his team to follow. "We'll meet at 7 like Kakashi, Rin, and I have a meeting with the Hokage. I'll also invite Kushina later," he said before grabbing Kakashi and Rin and disappearing in a yellow flash. Obito turned to himself around as soon as Sensei left. Why would I not go to the meeting with them? He asked himself before shrugging and running in the direction of the Uchiha compound. As jumped from the roof to the ground in front of the clan head's house, he sighed, hoping he wouldn't have to go through the emotions he did with his team. He shook his head as he dismissed the thought. The day Fugaku got emotional was if hell froze over. The only person who he'd expect to cry would be Shisui, well, if he heard about it anyway. The door opened and as Fugaku looked down to see me with wide eyes. "Yo Fugaku," Obito said as he looked at him. "I heard reports of you dying. What happened?" he asked as he ignored the scare and remained stoic, but if you look really closely you could see the relief in his eyes. "A lot. Did Itachi and Shisui know about it?" he asked as he stepped to the side to let me in. "No, I didn't tell them," Fugaku answered as he shut the door behind Obito. Thanks, I didn't want Shursui crying. Speaking of which, can you set up training, as I want to train them till 6? Obito asked as he turned to Fugaku. I can arrange for Shursui to get here. You can start by training Itachi until he arrives. He explained to Obito as he nodded in thanks. Obito went to where he trained his students last time and waited for them to arrive. He sat down on a rock as he thought about why he wanted to train them so badly. It could be because of his recent mission that showed Obito his limits. How was he to change the world if he died? And if he did die, having Itachi and Shursui take after him would make him less worried about the future. Good afternoon, Obito-san, Itachi said respectively as it broke Obito out of his thoughts. He looked the boy over before getting up and stretching. He hadn't slept in days, but with Hashirama's cells, I take a few more days with no sleep to affect him. Good afternoon, Itachi. We could practice a little until Shursui arrives. Obito said as he walked to the target practice to train Itachi. Yes, Itachi replies as he grabbed a couple of kunai and got into position. Go, I said as he threw the kunai and hit his target spot on. I looked down at the little protege. You were better than me when I was your age. He looked up at Obito with an arched eyebrow. Really? Obito nodded as he felt Shursui's chakra approaching. Hey, Nissan, I'm here. Shursui yelled as he ran into the clearing. He ran right up to Obito as he jumped and gave him a big hug. The hug surprised Obito, but he hugged him back regardless. Shursui came down from the hug, but when he looked at Obito he froze. Nissan, what happened to your face? Did someone hurt you? Obito bent down to Shursui's height before smiling lightly. No, I got this from protecting my best friends. Shursui's eyes scanned over his face before he meets his eyes. What made you want to hurt yourself to protect your friend Nissan? Well, I guess it was the bond one had with my friend. Obito pointed his finger on Shursui's heart. The bonds you make with the people around you are stored here. Always keep your friend in mind and never let go. And when your friend is in trouble, risk everything to save them. He turned to Itachi, who was silently watching the exchange. That is the first thing I wanted to teach you guys. Shursui smiled brightly while Itachi just nodded. I'm gonna keep that in my mind forever and ever. 13. Obito stood up as he looked back at the target practice. Let's get to work, shall we? He said as they started training. After training, the two, Obito left at 6:30 to go home and take a shower. As he was putting on his goggles, his reflection in his mirror stopped him. He instinctively put his hand on his scar-filled side of his face. He was getting memories of everything he did in the previous time. He'd most moved on, but it still lingered and he knew it would stay forever. Obito ran to Ichiraku's like his life depended on it. He was late a lot. The Uchiha compound wasn't particularly close to the compound and he didn't like to use unnecessary chakra. If he had a choice to walk, he would. He was still working on getting his reserves to where they were when he was an adult. Not that it was too far, but he used to have so much more. He stopped in front of the ramen stand and lifted the curtain. Sorry, I'm late. He stopped as he closed his eyes and scratched the back of his head. Welcome back, Obito. His team yelled loudly, which stopped him from talking. He smiled a genuine smile, one that he doesn't do a lot, as he listened to his team. As they ate ramen and laughed, he couldn't keep the smile from his face. Obito looked up at the sky as they left the stand. It's good to be back, he thought.